The gunshots echoed across the dusty plains of southern Colorado as Ruby Parker sprinted through the tall prairie grass, her heart hammering against her ribs. The year was 1878, and she had never imagined her life would come to this, running for her life under the merciless afternoon sun. The wound in her leg throbbed with each desperate step, blood seeping through her tattered dress. Behind her, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and ahead lay nothing but open country with the silhouette of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in the distance. Ruby stumbled, falling hard onto the sun-baked earth. Pain shot through her leg as she tried to stand, only to collapse again. The thundering hoofbeats drew closer. This was it. The men who had murdered her father would find her and finish what they'd started. She closed her eyes, preparing for the worst, when another sound cut through the air. A different horse, approaching from the west. Through squinted eyes, Ruby saw a tall figure on horseback racing toward her. As he neared, she could make out the features of a man she didn't recognize, broad-shouldered with a weathered face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He pulled his horse to a stop beside her, dust billowing around them. "Miss, those riders ain't friendly and they're gaining fast," he said, his voice deep and urgent as he extended his hand. "Come with me if you want to live." Ruby reached for his hand, but as he pulled her to her feet, her injured leg buckled beneath her. "I can't run," she said, her voice cracking with desperation. The cowboy's eyes darted to the blood on her dress, then to the horizon where the dust cloud of their pursuers grew larger. Without hesitation, he swung down from his saddle. "Then ride my horse," he said firmly, helping her up. "I'll follow on foot if I must." With strong hands, he lifted her onto his chestnut stallion. "Name's Dawson Wells," he said, placing the reins in her trembling hands. "Head for Westcliff. My cabin's just north of town near the creek. I'll catch up." "But they'll kill you," Ruby protested. "They'll have to catch me first." Dawson slapped the horse's flank. "Go, now." The horse bolted forward with Ruby clinging to its mane. She looked back to see Dawson running to a rocky outcropping, drawing his revolver as he went. The sound of gunfire erupted behind her, but the powerful animal beneath her carried her away from the chaos, toward the distant safety of Westcliff. The stallion seemed to know the way, following a faint trail through the grassland. Ruby's vision blurred as blood loss and exhaustion threatened to overtake her. She thought of her father, shot down in cold blood just hours earlier when the men came for their land. The deed to their homestead was still tucked inside her boot, the paper those men were willing to kill for. After what felt like hours, the horse crested a hill, and Ruby saw a small settlement nestled in the valley below. Westcliff. The sight of civilization gave her a surge of hope, but it faded quickly as darkness encroached on the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was the horse slowing to a trot as they approached the outskirts of town, and then blackness claimed her. Ruby awoke to the soft crackle of a fire and the scent of pine. Her eyes fluttered open to an unfamiliar ceiling of rough-hewn logs. She tried to sit up but winced at the sharp pain in her leg. "Easy there," came a woman's voice. "That wound needs time to heal." An older woman with silver-streaked hair moved into view, pressing a cool cloth to Ruby's forehead. "Where am I?" Ruby asked, her throat dry and voice raspy. "Dawson Wells' cabin," the woman replied. "I'm Martha Holloway, the midwife in these parts. Dawson's horse brought you straight here yesterday evening. You've been unconscious since." "Yesterday?" Ruby's mind raced. "Dawson, the man who helped me, is he?" Martha's expression softened. "He made it back about 2 hours after you arrived. Exhausted but alive. Said he lost those men in the hills." Relief flooded through Ruby, surprising her with its intensity. A man she barely knew had risked his life for her. The door opened, and Dawson himself stepped inside, ducking his head beneath the doorframe. In the cabin light, Ruby got her first proper look at him, tall and broad-shouldered with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. A day's worth of stubble darkened his jaw and his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "You're awake," he said, his voice gentler than she remembered. "That's good." "Thank you," Ruby said, meeting his gaze, "for saving my life." Dawson shrugged, seemingly uncomfortable with the gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same. Martha stood, gathering her things. "I've cleaned and stitched her wound. It'll heal well if she stays off it." She turned to Ruby. "You're lucky. The bullet only grazed you. Another inch and we'd be having a different conversation." After Martha left, a heavy silence fell over the cabin. Dawson moved around the small space, placing a kettle on the stove and pulling out a tin of coffee. "Those men," he finally said, his back to her. "Want to tell me why they were chasing you?" Ruby hesitated, her hand instinctively moving to her boot where the deed was hidden. Could she trust this man? He had saved her life, but in her 20 years, Ruby had learned that kindness often came with conditions. "They killed my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yesterday morning, we have had a homestead south of here, 60 acres with good water rights. Men came saying they represented the railroad, wanting us to sell. When Pa refused." She trailed off, the memory still raw. Dawson turned, his expression hardening. "Randall's men. You know them. Everyone in this valley knows Victor Randall. He owns the bank in Westcliff, has stakes in the silver mines, and buys up any land that might be in the path of the coming railroad." Dawson poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Ruby. "He's got the sheriff in his pocket, too." "Then there's no justice to be had here," Ruby said bitterly, accepting the cup. "Not the official kind, no." Dawson's eyes met hers. "But that doesn't mean you're without options." "What options does a woman alone have in a place like this?" Ruby asked. "For starters, you can rest and heal here," Dawson said. "My cabin's not much, but it's far enough from town that Randall's men won't come looking. Beyond that," he shrugged, "we'll figure it out. Why would you help me?" Ruby asked. "You don't know me." "I know enough," Dawson replied, his gaze steady. "I know what it's like to lose everything, and I know Randall's type. Men who think money gives them the right to take whatever they want." That night, as Ruby lay on Dawson's bed, he had insisted on taking the floor. She pondered her situation. Her father was gone. Their homestead was probably already being claimed by Randall's men. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to. The only thing of value she possessed was the deed in her boot and a genuine offer of help from a stranger. For the first time since her father's murder, Ruby allowed herself to cry, silent tears streaming down her face in the darkness of a cowboy's cabin. The next morning, Dawson was gone when Ruby awoke. A note on the table said he'd gone hunting and would return by midday. Martha arrived shortly after, bringing fresh bandages and a dress that would accommodate Ruby's wounded leg better than her blood-stained garments. "Dawson Wells is a good man," Martha said as she changed Ruby's bandage. "Keeps to himself mostly, but he's always been fair and honest." "You know him well?" Ruby asked, wincing as the bandage was removed. "Known him since he arrived here 3 years ago. Came from Texas, I believe, though he doesn't speak much about his past." Martha worked with practiced efficiency. "Lost his wife and child in some tragedy, that much I know." Ruby felt a pang of sorrow for the quiet cowboy. "He mentioned he knows what it's like to lose everything." Martha nodded solemnly. "Whatever happened, it changed him. He built this cabin with his own hands, keeps mostly to himself except when someone needs help. Then he's the first to offer it." When Dawson returned with a brace of rabbits, Ruby was sitting in a chair by the window, dressed in the simple blue cotton dress Martha had brought. Her auburn hair was brushed and pulled back with a ribbon, and color had returned to her cheeks. Dawson paused in the doorway, momentarily startled by the transformation. "You look better," he said, clearing his throat. "I feel better," Ruby replied with a small smile. "Martha says I should be able to put weight on my leg in a few days." "Good, that's good." Dawson busied himself preparing the rabbits for stew. "I asked around town today. Randall's men are still searching the area for you. They're saying you murdered your father and stole something valuable." Ruby's face paled. "That's a lie, I know," Dawson said calmly. "But it means you can't show your face in town anytime soon." "What am I supposed to do?" Ruby asked, frustration edging into her voice. "I can't hide in your cabin forever." "No, but you can stay until we figure things out." Dawson's hands worked steadily, cleaning the game. "The deed to your land, you still have it." Ruby hesitated only briefly before reaching down to her boot and withdrawing the folded document. "Pa always told me to keep it close. It's all I have left of him and our home." Dawson wiped his hands and took the paper, examining it carefully. "This deed gives you clear title to the land. If we could get this recorded at the territorial office in Denver, Randall couldn't touch it legally." "Denver is over 100 miles from here," Ruby pointed out. "It is," Dawson agreed. "But it might be your only chance to keep what's rightfully yours." That evening, over rabbit stew, they formulated a plan. Once Ruby could ride, they would make for Denver. Dawson knew the back trails well enough to avoid the main roads where Randall's men might be watching. In Denver, they would file the deed with the Territorial Land Office, establishing Ruby's clear ownership of the homestead. "And then what?" Ruby asked, setting her bowl aside. "Even with the deed recorded, I can't go back and work the land alone. Randall would find another way to take it." Dawson was quiet for a long moment. "There are options. You could sell to someone other than Randall, or you could find a partner to work the land with you." Their eyes met across the table and something unspoken passed between them. Ruby quickly looked away, her cheeks warming. She had known this man for barely 2 days, yet she felt safer with him than she had with anyone since her mother died years ago. "I should repay you somehow," Ruby said. "For all your help." "No need," Dawson replied. "Just get well. That's payment enough." Over the next few days, a routine developed. Dawson would leave early to tend to his small herd of cattle, returning by midday. Ruby, growing stronger each day, began to help around the cabin, cooking, mending, and eventually venturing outside to the small garden plot behind the cabin. On the 5th day, as Ruby was hanging laundry to dry, she heard riders approaching. Panic seized her as she hobbled back toward the cabin. Before she could reach the door, 3 men on horseback rounded the corner of the house, cutting off her escape. "Well, well," the leader said, a tall man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes. "Look what we found, boys. The Parker girl." Ruby backed against the cabin wall, her injured leg throbbing. "What do you want?" "You know what we want," the man sneered, dismounting. "The deed to your pa's land. Hand it over and maybe Mr. Randall will be merciful." "I don't have it," Ruby lied, her heart pounding. The man took a step closer. "Search the cabin," he ordered one of his companions. To Ruby, he said, "If you're lying, girl, you'll end up like your pa." Ruby's breath caught in her throat as the second man disappeared into the cabin. The third remained mounted, his hand resting on his holstered pistol. Long seconds stretched into minutes as the search continued. "Nothing, Silas," the man reported, emerging from the cabin. "Turn the place upside down." Silas's face darkened. "Where is it?" he demanded, grabbing Ruby's arm roughly. Before she could respond, a gunshot cracked the air. The mounted man cried out, clutching his arm as he tumbled from his horse. "Let her go," came Dawson's voice from the tree line. He emerged with his rifle leveled at Silas's chest. "Next one goes through your heart." Silas released Ruby but didn't back away. "This ain't your fight, Wells. The girl's a murderer and we're bringing her to justice." "The only murderers here are Randall's men," Dawson replied coldly. "Now get on your horses and ride out. Tell Randall if he wants to talk about the Parker land, he can come himself unarmed." For a tense moment, it seemed Silas might draw his weapon, but after looking from Dawson's steady rifle to his injured companion, he apparently thought better of it. "This ain't over," he snarled, backing toward his horse. "Randall doesn't forget those who cross him." "Neither do I," Dawson replied. Only after the men had disappeared down the trail did Dawson lower his rifle. He turned to Ruby, concern evident in his eyes. "Did they hurt you?" Ruby shook her head, though she was trembling. "No, but they know I'm here now." "Which means we need to move sooner than planned," Dawson said, guiding her into the cabin. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Ruby said with more confidence than she felt. "But what about you? You've done enough already." "This isn't your fight." Dawson's expression softened slightly. "Maybe not, but I made it mine when I helped you on the plains." He began gathering supplies, stuffing them into saddlebags. "We'll leave at first light. Take the high trail through the mountains. It's longer but safer." That night, sleep eluded Ruby. Her mind raced with fears about the journey ahead and what awaited them in Denver. But beyond those immediate concerns, she found herself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of Dawson Wells. In the dim light of the dying fire, she studied his sleeping form across the cabin. He had given her his bed again, despite her protests. There was something profoundly comforting about his presence, a steadiness that made her feel that perhaps everything would be all right. Ruby had never been one for fanciful notions of romance. Life on a homestead had been too demanding for such indulgences. But there was something about this quiet, honorable man that stirred feelings she hadn't known existed within her. Morning came with a fine mist hanging over the valley. Dawson had already saddled the horses by the time Ruby emerged from the cabin, dressed in men's trousers and a shirt he had provided for the journey. "The dress won't do for riding," he explained, helping her secure her few belongings. "These will be more practical." Ruby nodded, grateful for his thoughtfulness. She had tucked the deed securely inside her shirt, close to her heart. They rode out as the sun's first rays pierced the mist, heading north before cutting east into the mountains. Dawson led the way, vigilant for any sign of pursuit. Ruby's leg ached, but she bit back any complaints. This man was risking everything to help her. The least she could do was endure a little pain. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley. Westcliff was a small cluster of buildings far below, with the vast expanse of the wet mountain valley spreading beyond. "It's beautiful," Ruby said, pausing to take in the view. "I've never been this high up before." Dawson nodded, his eyes scanning the terrain below. "These mountains have a way of making a person feel small. I find it comforting somehow." "Comforting?" Ruby asked, surprised. "Reminds me that my troubles are just one small part of a much bigger world." He turned to her, a rare half-smile softening his features. "Come on. There's a place ahead where we can rest the horses and eat something." The place turned out to be a small plateau with a clear spring bubbling from the rocks. As they dismounted, Ruby's injured leg nearly gave way beneath her. Dawson was at her side instantly, strong hands steadying her. "Thank you," she murmured, acutely aware of his closeness. For a moment they stood there, his hands on her waist, her hands on his chest. Something shifted in his eyes, a warmth, a question. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "You should rest. I'll see to the horses." As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Ruby gathered the courage to ask about his past. "Martha mentioned you came from Texas. Did you have a ranch there?" A shadow passed over Dawson's face, and for a moment Ruby regretted her question. But then he nodded slowly. Had a small place outside Fort Worth. Nothing grand, but it was mine. Good water, decent grazing. He paused, his gaze distant. Had a wife, Sarah, a son too, Michael. He was just 3 when the fever took them both. Ruby's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry. It was 5 years ago now, Dawson continued, his voice low. Couldn't bear to stay there afterward. Too many memories. Sold everything and headed west. Ended up in Colorado, started over. And you've been alone since then. Seemed easier that way. His eyes met hers. Until now. The simplicity of his words, the raw honesty in them, touched something deep within Ruby. Before she could respond, however, Dawson stood abruptly. We should move on, he said, his tone practical again. Still have a lot of ground to cover before nightfall. They rode in companionable silence through the afternoon, the trail winding higher into the mountains. As dusk approached, Dawson led them to a sheltered hollow where they made camp for the night. Under a canopy of stars, with a small fire crackling between them, Ruby felt a strange sense of peace despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. Across the flames, Dawson's face was softened by the warm light, making him appear younger, less burdened. You ever think about going back to Texas? She asked. Dawson poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward. Not to stay. But sometimes I think about visiting their graves, never quite found the courage. Perhaps someday, Ruby suggested gently. Perhaps. He looked up at her. What about you? Before all this happened, what was your life like? Ruby hugged her knees to her chest. Simple. Hard work from sunrise to sunset. My mother died when I was 12, so it was just me and Pa after that. He taught me everything: how to hunt, how to fix a fence, how to read the weather. Her throat tightened with emotion. He wanted more for me than just being a farmer's wife. Taught me to read and write better than most men in these parts. He sounds like a good man, Dawson said. The best, Ruby agreed. He said I was as smart as any man and twice as determined. She smiled sadly at the memory. Now I'm not sure what I'll do. Even if we succeed in Denver, I can't work that land alone. You won't have to be alone, Dawson said, so quietly she almost didn't hear it over the crackling of the fire. Their eyes met, and this time neither looked away. In that moment, something unspoken yet profound passed between them, a recognition, a possibility. Morning brought a clear sky and a renewed sense of purpose. They broke camp early and continued their journey eastward through the mountains. By Dawson's estimation, they were making good time and would reach Denver in 4 days if the weather held. As they rode, Ruby found herself watching Dawson, the confident set of his shoulders, the gentle way he handled his horse, the vigilant attention he paid to their surroundings. He was unlike any man she had met before, combining strength with a quiet kindness that never felt condescending. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, bringing with them the threat of an early autumn storm. Dawson led them to a lined shack he knew of, a crude but serviceable shelter used by cowboys during cattle drives. Not exactly the Grand Hotel, he said as they dismounted, but it'll keep us dry. No sooner had they settled the horses in the lean-to adjoining the shack than the skies opened. Rain pounded on the roof as they huddled inside the small, one-room structure. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and Dawson soon had a fire burning, dispelling the dampness. Looks like we'll be here until morning, he said, hanging his wet coat near the fire. Storm like this makes the trails too dangerous. Ruby nodded, removing her own damp outer garments. The enforced proximity in the small shack created an intimacy neither had anticipated. As night fell and the rain continued to drum on the roof, they sat before the fire, sharing the last of Dawson's coffee. "Tell me about Denver," Ruby said, breaking a comfortable silence. "I've never been to a big city." "It's growing fast," Dawson replied. "Lots of people, lots of noise." "Not much like Westcliff," he smiled slightly. "But there's something exciting about it too, possibilities." "Do you ever think about living somewhere like that? Somewhere with more people?" Dawson considered the question. "Used to think I was better off alone, less chance of loss that way." His eyes met hers. "But lately I've been reconsidering that position." Ruby's heart quickened at his words and the look that accompanied them. "Because of me." "Because of you," he acknowledged simply. The admission hung in the air between them, neither quite knowing how to proceed. It was Ruby who finally bridged the gap, reaching across to place her hand over his. "I've never met anyone like you, Dawson Wells," she said softly. "You've risked everything for me when you had no reason to." "I had my reasons," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. His fingers interlaced with hers. "From the moment I saw you on that plane, something inside me knew that my life was about to change." Ruby moved closer, the firelight dancing across her features. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just of Randall and his men, but of these feelings. Everything is happening so fast." "I know," Dawson said. "And I won't rush you. When all this is over, when you're safe and your land is secured, then we can talk about what might be possible between us." His restraint, his respect for her situation, only made Ruby's growing feelings stronger. Before she could second-guess herself, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, almost chaste, but it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. When she pulled back, Dawson's eyes were wide with surprise and something deeper. "Ruby," he breathed her name like a prayer. "I know my own mind, Dawson Wells," she said with quiet determination, "and my heart." He reached up, his calloused hand cupping her cheek with infinite tenderness. "Are you sure? You've been through so much, I'm sure of you," she replied. "Everything else may be uncertain, but not how I feel when I'm with you." This time when they kissed, it was Dawson who initiated it, a kiss filled with promise and restrained passion. When they finally parted, both were breathless, eyes bright in the firelight. "We should rest," Dawson said reluctantly. "Long day ahead tomorrow." They slept side by side before the fire, his arm protectively around her waist, her head on his shoulder. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the small shack, Ruby felt a peace she had never known before. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having passed during the night. The mountain air was crisp and clean as they set out once more, the trails mudded but passable. Something had shifted between them, a new ease, a shared understanding of what might be possible once their journey was complete. As they descended from the high country toward the plains that would lead them to Denver, Dawson grew more vigilant. They were leaving the relative safety of the mountains, and the risk of encountering Randall's men increased with each passing mile. "We'll avoid the main trails," he explained as they paused to water the horses at a stream. "Might take longer, but it's safer." Ruby nodded, trusting his judgment completely. "How much farther to Denver?" "2 days if we push hard," Dawson replied, scanning the horizon. "We'll stay at a friend's place tonight, man named Thomas who has a small ranch east of here. He owes me a favor." They rode through the day, the terrain gradually flattening as they left the mountains behind. By late afternoon, they could see a small ranch in the distance, a modest house with a barn and corral set against the backdrop of the plains. As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, rifle in hand. He squinted at them for a moment before breaking into a wide grin. "Dawson Wells, as I live and breathe," he called, lowering his weapon. "Been a dog's age since you darkened my door." Thomas Harper was a burly man with a thick beard and laughing eyes. He welcomed them warmly, insisting they stay for dinner and accept his hospitality for the night. His wife, Caroline, was equally welcoming, immediately taking Ruby under her wing. "You're the first woman Dawson's brought around," Caroline confided as they prepared dinner in the kitchen. "Must be something special about you." Ruby blushed. "We're just traveling together out of necessity." Caroline gave her a knowing look. "Honey, I've known Dawson Wells for 3 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. That ain't necessity." Over dinner, Thomas revealed that news of Ruby's supposed crime had spread even this far. "Wanted posters in the trading post," he said gravely. "Offering a reward for information." Dawson's expression darkened. "Randall's reach is longer than I thought. You'll need to be extra careful approaching Denver," Thomas advised. "Take the south route, avoid the settlements." Later that night, alone in the small guest room Caroline had prepared for her, Ruby felt the weight of their situation pressing down. Randall was clearly determined to find her, and the closer they got to Denver, the more dangerous their journey became. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Dawson standing there, concern etched on his features. "Just wanted to make sure you're all right," he said quietly. Ruby stepped back, inviting him in. "I'm worried," she admitted once the door was closed. "What if we don't make it to Denver? What if Randall's men find us first?" Dawson took her hands in his. "We'll make it," he said with quiet confidence. "I promise you that." "And if we do, what then?" Ruby asked, voicing the question that had been on her mind. "Even if we record the deed, Randall won't stop coming after me." "Then we'll face that together," Dawson replied. "Ruby, I know this is all happening fast, but I want you to know." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I haven't felt this way about anyone since Sarah." "Never thought I would again." Ruby's heart swelled at his confession. "I feel the same," she whispered. "It scares me how much." Dawson pulled her gently into his arms, holding her close. "Whatever happens in Denver, whatever comes after, I want to be by your side if you'll have me." Ruby leaned back to look into his eyes. "Is that a proposal, Dawson Wells?" A smile tugged at his lips. "I suppose it is. Not very romantic, is it?" "It's perfect," Ruby said, reaching up to touch his face. "And yes, whatever happens, I want to face it together." Their kiss sealed the promise between them, a commitment made in the quiet of a borrowed room, with danger still looming on the horizon. They left Thomas and Caroline's ranch at first light, armed with fresh supplies and renewed determination. Thomas had provided detailed information about the least traveled routes to Denver, and Dawson set a brisk pace, hoping to cover as much ground as possible before nightfall. The day passed without incident, the vast Colorado plains stretching endlessly around them. By sunset, the distant silhouette of buildings could be seen on the horizon, the outskirts of Denver. "We'll camp here tonight," Dawson said, leading them to a small copse of trees beside a creek. "Enter the city in the morning. Less attention that way." As they made camp, Ruby could sense Dawson's growing tension. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, his hand never far from his revolver. "You're worried," she observed as they sat beside their small fire. "Just being cautious," he replied. "We're too close to success to take unnecessary risks." They ate a simple meal in relative silence, each lost in thoughts of what the next day might bring. After clearing away the remains of their dinner, Dawson sat beside Ruby, taking her hand in his. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said softly, "know that meeting you has been the best thing that's happened to me in years." Ruby leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I feel the same. If it weren't for my father's death and all that followed, we might never have met." "Life has strange ways of bringing people together," Dawson mused. Not that I'd wish your suffering on anyone, but I can't help but be grateful for the chance to know you." They slept close that night, finding solace in each other's presence beneath the vast canopy of stars. Tomorrow would bring either resolution or new challenges, but tonight they had this moment of peace. Morning brought with it a tense anticipation as they approached Denver. The city was larger than Ruby had imagined, with brick buildings lining the main streets and people hurrying about their business. After the quiet of the mountains and plains, the noise and bustle were overwhelming. Dawson led them to a modest hotel on a side street, far from the main thoroughfares. "Wait here," he instructed as they secured their horses. "I'll arrange for a room, best if you're seen as little as possible." Ruby nodded, remaining with the horses while Dawson entered the hotel. He returned moments later, key in hand. "Rooms at the back," he said quietly. "Once you're settled, I'll go find out where the territorial land office is." The room was small but clean, with a single window overlooking an alley. Ruby sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted from the journey and the constant state of vigilance. "Rest," Dawson said, his expression softening as he looked at her. "I'll be back soon." After he left, Ruby removed the deed from its hiding place, smoothing out the creased paper. Her father's name was written in bold letters, along with the precise description of their land. This document represented everything he had worked for, everything he had died protecting. She wouldn't let his sacrifice be in vain. Dawson returned an hour later, his expression grim. "Land office closes at 4, he said, "but there's a complication. There are men watching the building, Randall's men, I'd wager. He must have guessed our intentions." Ruby's heart sank. "What do we do?" Dawson paced the small room. "I have an idea, but it's risky." He sat beside her on the bed. "The land office has a back entrance used by the clerks. If we can get you in that way, you might be able to file the deed without being seen." "And if they catch me?" "They won't," Dawson said with fierce determination, "because they'll be too busy dealing with me." "What does that mean?" Ruby asked, alarm rising within her. "I'll create a distraction at the front entrance," Dawson explained. "Draw their attention while you slip in the back." "That's too dangerous," Ruby protested. "What if they recognize you? They're looking for a woman, not me," Dawson reasoned. "And I'm pretty good at taking care of myself." He took her hands in his. "Ruby, this might be our only chance. Once that deed is recorded, Randall can't legally take your land, no matter what lies he spreads about you." Ruby knew he was right, but the thought of him putting himself at risk filled her with dread. "There has to be another way." "If there is, I can't see it," Dawson said gently. "We came this far. Let's finish what we started." Their plan was set in motion the following afternoon. Dressed in clothes borrowed from the hotel proprietor's wife, who had been persuaded to help with a generous payment, Ruby was barely recognizable. Her auburn hair was tucked beneath a bonnet, her figure disguised by a voluminous dress quite unlike her usual attire. Dawson had scouted the land office thoroughly, identifying the rear entrance and the best approach that would keep Ruby out of sight of Randall's watchers. They would approach separately, Dawson creating his distraction at precisely 3:30, giving Ruby 15 minutes to slip in the back, file the deed, and get out before the office closed. "Meet me back at the hotel," Dawson instructed as they prepared to part ways. "If I'm not there by sundown, take the money I left and get on the first stage heading west." "I'm not leaving without you," Ruby said firmly. Dawson cupped her face in his hands. "Yes, you are. If things go wrong, you get yourself to safety. Promise me, Ruby." Reluctantly, she nodded. "I promise." He kissed her then, a kiss filled with all the things they might never have the chance to say. When they parted, his eyes held hers for a long moment before he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowded street. Ruby made her way carefully toward the land office, keeping to the less traveled side streets as Dawson had instructed. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone she passed must hear it. The deed was securely hidden in an inner pocket of her borrowed dress, the paper a constant reminder of what was at stake. When the clock tower struck 3:30, Ruby positioned herself near the rear entrance of the land office. Right on schedule, a commotion erupted at the front of the building, shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Dawson's distraction. Taking a deep breath, Ruby slipped through the back door and into a narrow hallway. A clerk looked up in surprise as she entered, but before he could question her presence, she produced the deed. "I need to record this land deed immediately," she said with as much authority as she could muster. "It's an urgent matter." The clerk hesitated, glancing toward the front of the building where the commotion continued. "The recording desk is that way," he finally said, pointing down the hall. "But there's some kind of disturbance." "Thank you," Ruby cut him off, moving quickly in the direction he indicated. The recording clerk was an older man with spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up with irritation as Ruby approached. "We're about to close, miss." "Please," Ruby said, placing the deed on his desk. "This can't wait." Something in her expression must have conveyed her desperation, for the clerk's face softened slightly. He took the deed, examining it carefully. "Parker Homestead," he murmured. "In Custer County." Ruby nodded, her throat too dry to speak. Each second felt like an eternity as the clerk methodically recorded the information in a large ledger. "There's been some inquiry about this property," the clerk remarked as he worked. "Fellow named Randall was in just yesterday, claiming the owner had died and he was purchasing it from the heirs." Ruby's blood ran cold. "The owner did die," she said carefully. "I'm his daughter and sole heir." The clerk peered at her over his spectacles. "Then Mr. Randall was mistaken in his claim." He stamped the deed with the territorial seal and made a final notation in his ledger. "This property is now officially recorded in the name of Ruby Parker. No one can legally contest your ownership without going through the territorial court." Relief washed over Ruby like a physical force. She took the deed with trembling hands, thanking the clerk profusely before making her way back toward the rear entrance. The commotion at the front of the building had quieted, which could either be very good or very bad. Outside, Ruby hurried through the back streets toward the hotel, constantly glancing over her shoulder for any sign of pursuit. The streets seemed unnaturally quiet, the usual bustle of the city subdued in the late afternoon light. When she reached the hotel, there was no sign of Dawson. Ruby paced the small room, alternating between hope and fear as the minutes stretched into hours. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, when she heard footsteps outside the door. Ruby froze, her hand going to the small derringer Dawson had given her for protection. The door opened slowly to reveal Dawson himself, his face bruised and a cut above his eye, but very much alive. "You did it," he said, a smile breaking through his battered appearance. "I heard them talking. The deed is recorded." Relief and joy overwhelmed Ruby as she rushed into his arms, heedless of his injuries. "I was so worried," she murmured against his chest. "What happened?" "Randall's men recognized me," Dawson admitted, wincing slightly as Ruby's embrace pressed against what were likely bruised ribs. "There was a fight, but I managed to slip away in the confusion." "Are you badly hurt?" Ruby asked, leading him to sit on the bed. "Nothing that won't heal," he assured her, "and it was worth it. Your land is secure now, Ruby. Legally, no one can take it from you." The significance of their achievement washed over her. They had done it. Against all odds, they had secured her inheritance and thwarted Randall's plans. Yet the victory felt incomplete while Randall himself remained a threat. He'll still come after us, Ruby said, voicing the concern they both shared. Recording the deed won't stop him from seeking revenge. Dawson nodded grimly. Which is why we need to leave Denver first thing tomorrow, head back a different way than we came. And then what? Ruby asked. My father's murderers are still free. Randall still controls Westcliff. One battle at a time, Dawson said, taking her hand. We've won this one. The next will be bringing Randall to justice, but we need to be smart about it. That night, as Dawson slept fitfully beside her, Ruby lay awake planning their next move. Recording the deed had secured her legal ownership of the land, but as long as Randall remained in power in Westcliff, she could never return to claim it. There had to be a way to expose his crimes, to bring him to account for her father's murder. An idea began to form in her mind, risky, perhaps even foolhardy, but potentially effective. By the time dawn broke, Ruby had made her decision. We need to go to the territorial governor, she told Dawson over breakfast. With the deed recorded, we have proof that Randall was trying to steal my land. If we can convince the governor to send a federal marshal to investigate, we might be able to expose all of Randall's crimes. Dawson considered her proposal. The governor's office is here in Denver, he said slowly. It's worth trying, though Randall has powerful friends. But he doesn't have the law on his side, Ruby insisted. Not the real law. If we can get a federal marshal involved, one who isn't in Randall's pocket. It's a good plan, Dawson agreed, but also dangerous if Randall gets wind of it. He already wants us dead, Ruby pointed out. What have we got to lose? Gaining an audience with the territorial governor proved challenging but not impossible. Dawson knew a former ranger from his Texas days who now served on the governor's staff. With his help, they secured a meeting for the following day. Governor Edward McCook was a stern-looking man with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened impassively as Ruby recounted the events of the past weeks: her father's murder, her flight from Randall's men, and their journey to Denver to record the deed. These are serious accusations, Miss Parker, the governor said when she had finished. Mr. Randall is a prominent businessman with considerable influence in the territory. He's also a murderer and a thief, Ruby replied firmly. I have the recorded deed proving my ownership of the land he was trying to steal, and there are witnesses to his men's violence. The governor turned to Dawson. You can corroborate Miss Parker's claims. Every word, Dawson confirmed. I've known Victor Randall by reputation for years. He's been buying or forcing people off their land all along the proposed railroad route. Ruby's father was just his latest victim. Governor McCook steepled his fingers, considering. The territorial government can't act on accusations alone, no matter how compelling. But he paused, seeming to come to a decision. I can assign a federal marshal to investigate these claims. If evidence of murder and land theft is found, Mr. Randall will face justice. Relief flooded through Ruby. It wasn't an immediate solution, but it was a start in official investigation that Randall couldn't easily dismiss or corrupt. When can the marshal begin? She asked. Marshal Jensen is currently in Colorado Springs, the governor replied. He can be in Westcliff within the week. In the meantime, I suggest you both remain in Denver where it's safer. After leaving the governor's office, Ruby felt a cautious optimism. They had taken another step toward justice, though the path ahead remained uncertain. You think it will work? She asked Dawson as they walked back to their hotel. Will a federal investigation be enough to bring Randall down? If there's evidence to be found, Jensen will find it, Dawson said confidently. He has a reputation for thoroughness and honesty, and Randall's men aren't as careful as they think. There will be witnesses, evidence they overlooked. Ruby slipped her hand into his as they walked. And then what? When it's over, Dawson squeezed her hand gently. Then we have choices to make, together. For the next week, they remained in Denver, moving to a different hotel as a precaution against Randall's men finding them. Ruby grew to appreciate the city's energy and opportunities, though she missed the open spaces of the countryside. Dawson used the time to make inquiries about Randall's business dealings in Denver, uncovering connections that might prove useful to Marshal Jensen's investigation. Ruby, meanwhile, learned what she could about territorial law and property rights, determined to understand fully what would be involved in reclaiming her land. They also grew closer, their feelings deepening as they shared quiet evenings and tentative plans for the future. Dawson spoke of building a proper house on Ruby's land, combining their resources to create something better than either had alone. Ruby imagined a life where they worked side by side, perhaps even starting a family of their own one day. Word finally came through the governor's office. Marshal Jensen had arrived in Westcliff and begun his investigation. Initial reports were promising several witnesses had come forward, including Martha Holloway, who had treated Ruby's wound and could testify to the violence perpetrated by Randall's men. "It's time to go back," Ruby said when they received the news. "I need to be there to face Randall when he's finally brought to justice." Dawson hesitated. "It's still dangerous. Jensen's investigation is just beginning." "This is my fight, Dawson," Ruby insisted. "My father's murder, my land. I can't hide in Denver while others stand up to Randall." Seeing the determination in her eyes, Dawson nodded. "Then we go together, but we take precautions." They left Denver the next morning, taking a circuitous route back toward Westcliff. This time, they traveled with the law on their side. A letter from the governor himself confirming Ruby's status as a witness in an official investigation rather than a fugitive. The journey was tense, but uneventful. As they approached Westcliff, however, they encountered a rider heading in the opposite direction, one of Thomas Harper's ranch hands. "Miss Parker, Mr. Wells," the young man called, pulling his horse to a stop beside them. "Mr. Harper sent me to find you. There's been trouble in Westcliff." Ruby's heart sank. "What kind of trouble?" "Marshal Jensen was shot 2 days ago," the ranch hand reported grimly. "He's alive but badly wounded. Randall's claiming it was a drifter, but nobody believes it. Town's on edge, miss." Dawson's expression darkened. "Where's the marshal now?" "Doc Green's place in town. Mr. Harper said to tell you he's got men watching over him day and night. Randall's boys won't get a second chance." They pushed on to Thomas's ranch, arriving as dusk was falling. Thomas himself met them at the door, his normally jovial face serious. "Glad you made it," he said, ushering them inside. "Situation's getting worse. Jensen was making progress, too much progress. Got witnesses to talk about your father's murder, Ruby. That's when they tried to silence him." "How bad is it?" Dawson asked. "Bad enough," Thomas replied. "Bullet missed his heart but punctured a lung. Doc says he'll live, but he's in no condition to continue the investigation." Ruby sank into a chair, the weight of the setback heavy upon her. "So Randall wins again." "Not necessarily," Dawson said, his jaw set in determination. "The governor's involved now. An attack on a federal marshal isn't something that can be ignored or covered up." Thomas nodded in agreement. "Already sent word to Denver. Expect there'll be more marshals arriving soon. In the meantime, though, Westcliff isn't safe for either of you. Randall's men are everywhere, and they're desperate now." They spent the night at Thomas's ranch, planning their next move. Ruby was torn between the desire to see justice done and the reality that her presence in Westcliff might only complicate matters. "Maybe we should go back to Denver," she suggested reluctantly. Wait for the additional marshals. Dawson shook his head. Running won't solve anything. Besides, Jensen might have information that could help the investigation, information he hasn't had a chance to pass on. In the end, they decided to approach the situation carefully. Dawson would go into town first, posing as a buyer interested in local properties. Through Doc Green, a man Thomas vouched for, he would try to speak with Jensen and learn what progress had been made before the shooting. Ruby would remain at the ranch until it was safe, though she chafed at the delay. Her father's murderers were in Westcliff, perhaps walking freely about the town, while she hid in the countryside. The next morning, Dawson rode into town alone. The hours of his absence stretched interminably for Ruby, who alternated between pacing the ranch house and staring out the window toward Westcliff. When Dawson finally returned in the late afternoon, his expression was grim but determined. "Jensen's conscious," he reported. "Weak, but able to talk. He's gathered enough evidence to arrest Randall and at least 3 of his men for your father's murder and other crimes." Hope flared in Ruby's heart. "Then it's over." "Not quite," Dawson cautioned. "The evidence is hidden. Jensen didn't trust anyone in town. It's in a lockbox buried near the old mission ruins outside town. He gave me directions and the key. We need to retrieve it before Randall's men figure out it exists," Ruby said, already reaching for her coat. "It's too dangerous for you to come," Dawson argued. "Randall's men are watching the roads." "This is my fight, Dawson," Ruby reminded him firmly. "I'm coming with you." Seeing the determination in her eyes, Dawson relented. "We'll go tonight after dark. Less chance of being seen." The mission ruins lay a few miles outside Westcliff, remnants of an early Spanish settlement long abandoned. Under the light of a 3/4 moon, Ruby and Dawson approached cautiously, alert for any sign that Randall's men might have had the same idea. The ruins were silent, almost ethereal in the moonlight. Following Jensen's directions, they made their way to a partially collapsed wall where a large stone marked the spot. Dawson worked quickly, digging in the soft earth until his fingers struck metal. The lockbox was small but heavy, securely locked. Jensen's key turned smoothly, and inside they found a packet of documents, witness statements, and most damning of all, a ledger showing payments to the men who had attacked Ruby's father. "This is it," Ruby breathed, leafing through the papers. "Everything we need to bring Randall to justice." A twig snapped in the darkness behind them. Dawson's hand went to his gun as he pushed Ruby behind him. "Who's there?" he called sharply. "Just me, Mr. Wells," came Martha Holloway's voice as she stepped into the moonlight. "Doc Green sent me." "Marshal Jensen's taken a turn for the worse. He's asking for you both." They hurried back to Westcliff, the precious lockbox hidden beneath Dawson's coat. The town was quiet, most businesses closed for the night. Doc Green's office sat at the edge of town, a single lamp burning in the window. The doctor himself admitted them, his expression grave. "He's fading," he said quietly, leading them to a back room where Marshal Jensen lay, his breathing labored and face pale. The marshal's eyes fluttered open as they approached. "Got the box," he whispered. "Yes," Dawson confirmed, showing him the corner of it beneath his coat. "All the evidence is safe." Relief washed over Jensen's features. "Good. Randall's planning to leave town tomorrow, taking the morning stage to Denver. Can't let him escape justice." "We won't," Ruby promised, taking the marshal's hand. "Thank you for everything you've done." Jensen's grip was weak but determined. "Was just doing my job, miss. Sorry I couldn't finish it." "You've done more than enough," Dawson assured him. "Now rest. We'll take it from here." Outside the doctor's office, they conferred in low voices. "If Randall's leaving tomorrow, we need to move quickly," Ruby said. "But how? We can't arrest him ourselves." Dawson thought for a moment. Sheriff Jackson may be in Randall's pocket, but he's still the law in Westcliff. If we present him with this evidence in public with witnesses, he won't be able to ignore it. And if he tries, Ruby asked. Then we make sure everyone in town sees the evidence, Dawson replied grimly. Randall's not the only one with influence in Westcliff. There are plenty of honest people who have suffered under his control. They spent the night at Doc Green's, taking turns watching over Marshall Jensen, who stabilized somewhat under the doctor's care. By morning, they had formulated a plan. The stage to Denver departed at 10 o'clock from in front of the Westcliff Hotel. Randall would be there, possibly with some of his men. It would be their best opportunity to confront him publicly. As the hour approached, Ruby felt a strange calm settle over her. After weeks of running, of fear and uncertainty, the end was finally in sight. Justice for her father was within reach. They positioned themselves near the hotel, the lockbox of evidence securely in Dawson's possession. Thomas Harper and several of his men were strategically placed around the square, ready to intervene if things turned violent. At 9:45, Victor Randall emerged from the hotel. Ruby was surprised by his ordinary appearance, a well-dressed man of middle years with a neatly trimmed beard and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to deference. It was difficult to reconcile this unremarkable figure with the monster who had ordered her father's death. Randall was accompanied by two men Ruby recognized as being among those who had chased her from her home. The sight of them rekindled her anger, strengthening her resolve. As Randall moved toward the waiting stage, Dawson stepped forward, Ruby at his side. "Victor Randall," he called, his voice carrying across the square. "In the name of territorial law, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Samuel Parker." A hush fell over the crowd that had gathered to see the stage depart. Randall turned slowly, his expression one of mild annoyance rather than alarm. "On whose authority?" he asked coldly. "Marshall Jensen's," Dawson replied, holding up the lockbox. "We have all the evidence right here. Witness statements. Financial records showing payments to the men who killed Samuel Parker. Attempts to fraudulently acquire his land." Randall's composure slipped, his eyes narrowing as they fixed on the box. "Marshall Jensen is in no condition to make arrests," he said, regaining his poise. "And you, Wells, have no authority whatsoever." "That's why we're turning the evidence over to Sheriff Jackson," Ruby said, stepping forward, in full view of everyone here. The sheriff, drawn by the commotion, pushed through the crowd. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Justice, Sheriff," Ruby declared, her voice strong despite her racing heart. "Justice for my father and every other person Victor Randall has wronged." She could see the indecision in the sheriff's eyes. Jackson might be in Randall's pay, but with so many witnesses, he couldn't simply dismiss the accusation. "This is absurd," Randall sneered. "The Parker girl is wanted for her father's murder. She's trying to deflect blame with these wild accusations." "The territorial governor himself has cleared Miss Parker of all charges," Dawson countered, producing the letter they had brought from Denver. "And Marshall Jensen's investigation has uncovered the truth." A murmur ran through the crowd. People were listening, watching intently as the drama unfolded. Ruby recognized faces from town: the blacksmith, the general store owner, ordinary people who had lived under Randall's influence for too long. Sheriff Jackson reluctantly took the letter, reading it slowly. "This appears legitimate," he admitted grudgingly. "The lockbox contains all the evidence," Dawson said, holding it out, "including the names of the men Randall hired to kill Samuel Parker and attempt to kill his daughter." One of the men with Randall reached for his gun, but Thomas Harper and his ranch hands moved in, weapons already drawn. "I wouldn't," Thomas advised coolly. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Randall's cold eyes assessed the situation, calculating his chances. The crowd had grown, townspeople drawn by the confrontation. There would be no quiet disappearance, no convenient accident to explain away the evidence. "Sheriff," Ruby said into the tense silence, "my father was murdered on his own land for refusing to sell to Mr. Randall. I nearly suffered the same fate. Will you do your duty and arrest those responsible, or will everyone here witness you choose Randall's money over justice?" It was the public challenge that decided the matter. With so many witnesses, Sheriff Jackson couldn't afford to be seen openly defying territorial law. Reluctantly, he took the lockbox from Dawson. "Victor Randall," he said formally, "you're under arrest pending investigation of these charges. Your men as well." The arrest of Victor Randall sent shockwaves through Westcliff. As the evidence from Marshal Jensen's investigation became public, others came forward with their own accounts of Randall's corruption and strong-arm tactics. The web of intimidation that had kept people silent began to unravel. In the days that followed, Ruby stayed at Martha Holloway's home in town, visiting Marshal Jensen daily as he slowly recovered from his wounds. Dawson divided his time between Ruby and helping the territorial authorities who arrived to take control of the investigation. A week after Randall's arrest, Ruby finally returned to her homestead. The small house her father had built stood empty, a layer of dust covering the familiar furnishings. Standing in the doorway, Ruby was overwhelmed by memories her father at the table calculating crop yields, teaching her to read by lamplight, his gentle laugh when she said something clever. "You all right?" Dawson asked softly from behind her. Ruby nodded, blinking back tears. "It's strange. Everything's exactly as we left it that day, but everything's changed." Dawson's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. "Not everything," he said. "This is still your home, still your land." "Our land," Ruby corrected, turning to face him, "if you still want it to be." In answer, Dawson pulled her gently into his arms. "I want whatever future includes you, Ruby Parker." 2 months later, with Victor Randall awaiting trial in Denver and his network of corruption dismantled, Ruby and Dawson were married in a simple ceremony at the Westcliff Church. Martha Holloway, Thomas and Caroline Harper, and even Marshal Jensen, now recovered enough to travel, attended the celebration. As fall gave way to winter, they worked side by side to prepare the homestead for the coming season. Dawson built an addition to the small house, transforming it into a proper home. Ruby tended the garden and made plans for spring planting. Together, they began to heal from the traumas of the past and build something new. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside, they sat before the fire in their cozy home. Ruby nestled against Dawson's chest, his arm wrapped securely around her. "I have something to tell you," she said softly, looking up at her husband's face. "Something wonderful." Understanding dawned in Dawson's eyes as his hand moved to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered. Ruby nodded, her heart full to bursting with joy. "Due in summer, according to Martha." Dawson's eyes shimmered with emotion as he pulled her close. "I never thought I'd have this again," he said, his voice rough. "A family. A future filled with hope instead of memories." "Neither did I," Ruby admitted. "That day on the plains when you found me, I thought my life was ending. I never imagined it was just beginning." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the land in pristine white. Inside, Ruby Parker Wells rested in the arms of the man who had once told her, "Then ride my horse. I'll follow on foot if I must," words that had marked the beginning of their journey together. Life in the Colorado Territory was never easy, but with love, determination, and each other, They had found something precious. A home built on trust, a love forged through adversity, and a future limited only by the vastness of the western sky. 5 years later, Ruby stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Dawson taught their 4-year-old son, Samuel, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Sarah, sat on Ruby's hip, chattering excitedly as she watched her brother. The homestead had flourished under their care. Fields of wheat and corn stretched to the east, while cattle grazed on the western pastures. A new barn stood where the old one had been, and fruit trees planted the first spring of their marriage now bore abundantly. Victor Randall had been convicted and imprisoned, his empire of corruption dismantled. Westcliff had changed too, growing into a thriving community free from his influence. Ruby and Dawson had become respected figures in the area, known for their fairness and willingness to help neighbors in need. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Dawson lifted Samuel from the pony and carried him back toward the house, their son's excited voice carrying across the yard as he recounted his adventure. Ruby smiled at the sight of them, her heart full of gratitude for the life they had built together. From terror and tragedy had come joy beyond measure, a testament to courage, love, and the human capacity to begin again. When Dawson reached the porch, his eyes met Ruby's with the same tenderness that had sustained them through every challenge. In them, she saw the reflection of their shared past and the promise of their future, a love story written across the wild Colorado landscape, as enduring as the mountains that watched over them. "Ready to come inside?" Ruby asked, reaching for his hand. Dawson's fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong. "With you," he said simply, "always." Together, they stepped into the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, their love a beacon that would guide them through whatever adventures still lay ahead in the vast, untamed promise of the West.